When Jack Miller moved to the picturesque Willow Creek Estates, he never imagined his dream home would become a living nightmare. An iron-fisted HOA president, secret corruption, and ruthless intimidation threatened to destroy his life. But when his family becomes the target, Jack's father, a powerful federal judge, steps in, igniting a battle that will tear the community apart. Secrets unravel, alliances shatter, and lives hang in the balance. Don't miss this gripping tale of power, justice, and redemption. Stay tuned till the end. Jack Miller had always dreamed of owning his own home. After years of hard work, he finally did it. Moved into a beautiful house at Willow Creek Estates, an upscale neighborhood known for its manicured lawns and quiet, peaceful atmosphere. The houses lined up in perfect symmetry, each one painted in neutral tones with pristine driveways and flower beds. Jack couldn't have been happier. This place was his new beginning, a chance to finally put down roots and build something real for himself. He was proud, and he wanted to share that pride with his family. A few months after moving in, Jack planned a family barbecue to celebrate his new home. His parents, Robert and Linda Miller, were coming up from the city. Robert was a federal judge, calm, composed, and the kind of man whose presence commanded respect without needing to raise his voice. Jack's sister Emma and her husband Mike were also bringing their kids, who were thrilled at the idea of playing in Uncle Jack's big backyard. The smell of sizzling burgers filled the air, and the sound of children's laughter echoed across the lawn. Emma's two boys were darting through the sprinkler, shrieking with joy as water sprayed in shimmering arcs. Jack grinned as he flipped the patties, grateful for the sound of life and happiness in his yard. Suddenly, the air shifted. A quiet that didn't belong settled over them. Jack looked up and saw a figure striding purposefully across his lawn. She was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a floral blouse buttoned all the way up despite the heat. In her hands, a clipboard was gripped tightly like it was a weapon. Behind her followed a man in a golf shirt and khakis, looking equally stern. "Excuse me," the woman called, her voice slicing through the chatter. "What exactly is happening here?" Jack wiped his hands on a dish rag and stepped forward, still holding the spatula. "Just a family barbecue. I'm Jack Miller. Just moved in. Can I help you with something?" The woman's lips pressed into a tight line as she surveyed the yard. "Are these people registered guests?" she demanded, her eyes flicking toward Emma and the kids. Jack blinked, trying to process. No. They're my family. Just here for the weekend." The woman's nostrils flared as if she'd caught a whiff of something foul. "I'm Karen Blake, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. According to our bylaws, all visitors must be registered with the HOA office 72 hours prior to their arrival." Jack couldn't help but let out a laugh, thinking she had to be joking. But Karen's face remained stone cold. "You're serious?" She flipped open her clipboard and pointed to a line on her paper. "It's clearly outlined in the community covenant you signed. Page 47, Bylaw 3.12. All visitors. Failure to comply results in a formal warning, and repeat offenses carry fines." Emma exchanged a look with Mike, who looked just as baffled. Jack held his hands up, trying to de-escalate. "Look, I didn't know about that rule. I'll make sure to register next time, okay?" Karen didn't budge. "That's not how it works, Mr. Miller. They need to leave immediately and return only after being properly registered." Jack felt his temper rise. "Seriously? They're my family. They're not causing any trouble." Karen fixed him with a stare colder than ice. "Rules maintain property values, Mr. Miller. Without them, this community would descend into chaos. I'm enforcing them for your benefit as much as anyone else's." Before Jack could respond, his father, Robert, who had been quietly observing from the patio, stood and approached. His presence was calm and unyielding, and Karen's shoulders seemed to tense up at his approach. "Is there a problem here?" Robert asked, his voice even and authoritative. Karen gave a curt nod. "Your son violated HOA regulations. Unregistered guests are not permitted." Robert glanced at Jack, then back at Karen. "Are you suggesting that family members can't visit their relatives in their own home?" Karen didn't flinch. "The rules apply equally to everyone, sir, even judges." Robert gave a slight, amused smile. "Interesting interpretation. I'd be curious to see the legal precedent that allows an HOA to dictate visitation rights on private property. Karen's jaw clenched. The covenant is legally binding. Legally binding doesn't mean legally sound, Robert countered smoothly. You may want to brush up on the difference. Karen, clearly flustered but unwilling to back down, huffed and scribbled something on her clipboard before turning on her heel and striding away. Jack let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Dad, Jack muttered, still annoyed. This is crazy. Are all HOAs like this? Robert put a hand on his son's shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. Some people confuse authority with power. This isn't about rules, son. It's about control. She's not going to let this go. The family tried to go back to their barbecue, but the mood had shifted. The kids seemed quieter, unsure if their laughter would bring the wrath of the HOA down on them again. Jack felt guilty for ruining what should have been a perfect day. The next morning, Jack found a formal warning taped to his door, along with a notice of a $500 fine for continued violations. His stomach twisted in knots, anger simmering just below the surface. That evening, his father sat with him on the patio, a beer in his hand, looking thoughtful. You need to read that covenant carefully, Robert advised. See what kind of loopholes she's exploiting. Most HOA rules don't hold up under scrutiny, especially if they infringe on basic rights. Jack nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. Little did he know, Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was orchestrating an entire campaign to push him and his family out of the neighborhood. The SUV he'd noticed earlier wasn't just any car. It belonged to Henry Carter, the HOA vice president and Karen's right-hand man. They were watching him, documenting every move his family made, building a case to make his life miserable. When Emma and Mike left the next day, Jack couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of defeat. He hadn't just lost a barbecue, he'd lost his sense of safety and peace in his own home. That night, Jack received an anonymous text message. Don't fight them. They always win. Jack looked out his window at the darkened street, the glow from the street lamps casting eerie shadows. In the distance, he saw Karen and Henry talking with another board member near the HOA office. Jack knew he was in for a battle, but he had no idea just how far they would go or how determined his father would be to expose the corruption festering within Willow Creek Estates. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Jack couldn't take a step outside his house without feeling like he was being watched. Every time he opened his front door, he noticed Karen's SUV slowly cruising by or parked at the end of the block, like a predator stalking its prey. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of Henry Carter taking pictures of his house or scribbling notes on his clipboard. Jack tried to brush it off, but the uneasy feeling never left him. One evening, while Jack was relaxing on his porch after work, his phone buzzed with an email from the HOA. Another fine, this time for improper lawn maintenance. Jack couldn't believe it. He had mowed the grass just 2 days prior, and it looked immaculate. But the fine notice claimed his yard did not meet the aesthetic standards of the community. Attached were pictures showing a few blades of grass that had grown unevenly near the sidewalk. It was absurd. Frustrated, Jack marched to the HOA office, determined to confront Karen and demand an explanation. As he approached, he saw a group of neighbors gathered outside, whispering and shooting worried glances in his direction. Inside, Karen sat behind a massive desk, Henry standing beside her like a guard dog. Karen didn't even look up when Jack entered. I got another fine, Jack said, forcing himself to remain calm. Karen didn't bother hiding her smug smile. Community standards must be maintained, Mr. Miller, as outlined in the bylaws. Oh, save it, Jack snapped. You know damn well my lawn is perfectly fine. This is harassment, plain and simple. Karen finally looked up, her eyes gleaming with malice. You're not being harassed, Mr. Miller. You're simply being reminded to follow the rules. If you can't manage that, perhaps Willow Creek Estates isn't the right community for you. Before Jack could respond, Robert appeared behind him, his expression stern but controlled. Are you suggesting you're attempting to force my son out of his legally purchased property, Miss Blake? Karen stiffened at the sight of Robert. Of course not. We're simply maintaining standards. Some residents have voiced concerns about the disruptive presence of unregistered guests, and the general decline in property values. Robert gave a small, humorless smile. Interesting interpretation of your responsibilities. You do realize that selectively targeting homeowners with excessive fines could be considered harassment and possibly illegal, don't you? Henry scoffed. We're just doing our job. Maybe your son should follow the rules like everyone else. Jack opened his mouth to retaliate, but Robert put a hand on his shoulder. We'll see about that, Robert said calmly. I suggest you begin preparing your financial records and HOA documentation. I'll be requesting them through official channels soon. Back home, Robert and Jack sat down at the kitchen table to devise a plan. Robert made several phone calls to contacts in the county administration and the district attorney's office. He suspected that Karen and Henry were abusing their power, but proving it would require hard evidence. The next morning, as Jack headed out to work, he noticed a notice taped to his door, a summons to an HOA meeting to address ongoing violations and community concerns. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening, and the wording made it clear that his attendance was mandatory. Throughout the week, the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker. Jack noticed his neighbors avoiding eye contact, whispers fading as he passed by. One evening, Mrs. Collins from next door hurried over, looking nervously around to make sure no one was watching. Jack, she whispered, be careful. Karen's been going door to door, telling people you're causing trouble. She's rallying everyone against you. Said you're trying to bring down the HOA and ruin the neighborhood? Jack's stomach twisted with anxiety. Why would she say that? Mrs. Collins hesitated. She said you're plotting to bring in undesirable elements and that you're deliberately ignoring the rules to create chaos. I don't believe it, of course, but some folks are scared. They don't want to lose their homes. The absurdity of it all made Jack's head spin. How could one woman create so much fear and division? That night, Robert called him to discuss strategy. Karen is banking on intimidation and control, Robert explained. If we're going to fight this, we need to expose the truth. We have to show the community that she's manipulating them. But how? Jack asked. Everyone's already convinced I'm the bad guy. Not everyone, Robert replied. People are afraid, but fear doesn't last when faced with the truth. We're going to gather evidence. I've spoken to a few legal colleagues, and they agree. If we can prove Karen's abusing her position, we can have her removed. On Friday, Jack walked into the community center, his nerves buzzing. The place was packed with neighbors, some curious, others hostile. Karen stood at the front of the room, smiling like a queen addressing her subjects. Henry and Susan Hill were flanking her, faces stern and unyielding. Thank you all for coming, Karen announced. We're here to discuss ongoing issues with certain residents disregarding our community standards. She fixed her gaze on Jack. Mr. Miller has repeatedly violated HOA regulations, causing distress and tension among residents. We must address whether his continued presence is detrimental to our neighborhood's harmony. Jack's face burned with anger. He wanted to shout, to call her a liar, but Robert gave him a subtle shake of the head, signaling patience. Karen called up Henry, who presented a slideshow of alleged violations, photos of Jack's backyard, cars parked at awkward angles, and even a video of his niece playing too loudly. It was petty and ridiculous, but Karen made it sound like Jack was single-handedly destroying the community. When the presentation ended, Robert stood up. I'd like to respond to these accusations, he said, his tone even but authoritative. Karen looked taken aback. This is not a courtroom, Judge Davis. You're not in charge here. Robert smiled calmly. You're right. It's not a courtroom, but it is a public meeting, and Jack has the right to defend himself. Karen reluctantly nodded, and Robert walked to the front, glancing around the room. My son moved here because he loved this neighborhood. He wanted to be part of a community. But what he found wasn't unity. It was intimidation and bullying. Several neighbors murmured uncomfortably, and Karen's face tightened. Many of you don't know this, Robert continued, but under county law, HOA regulations cannot violate fundamental rights of property owners. What Karen Blake has been doing, using excessive fines and surveillance to harass and isolate my son, is not only unethical, but also illegal. Henry tried to interrupt, but Robert cut him off. We have documented evidence of financial impropriety and conflicts of interest within this HOA. Contracts awarded without competitive bidding, funds unaccounted for, and deliberate harassment of residents who dare to question the leadership. A wave of surprise rippled through the room. Karen's face paled, but she stood her ground, trying to maintain control. This isn't about rules, Robert concluded. It's about power. Power Karen Blake has abused for too long, and it stops now. For the first time, Jack saw uncertainty flicker across Karen's face. She tried to regain her composure, but Robert wasn't finished. We've filed formal complaints with the County Oversight Board and the District Attorney. An investigation is already underway. Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Jack looked around, seeing some neighbors whispering to each other, a few even nodding in agreement. The tide was finally starting to turn. The days following the HOA meeting were a blur of whispered conversations and suspicious glances. It was clear that not everyone was convinced that Karen and her cronies were the villains. Some neighbors still seemed wary of Jack, while others cautiously approached him with supportive words when they thought no one was watching. Then, just when Jack thought things might be calming down, disaster struck. Early one morning, his phone buzzed with a frantic call from Emma. She was sobbing, her words barely coherent. "Jack, they towed my car," she cried. "What? Who towed your car?" Jack demanded, already slipping into his shoes. "I was parked in your driveway overnight. I came to drop off some groceries and stayed a little late. When I came out this morning, it was gone. There's a notice taped to your door from the HOA saying it was unauthorized and obstructing community safety." Jack's hands shook with fury as he ripped the notice off his door. A $1,000 fine for illegal parking and obstructing access. He immediately called the towing company and learned that the fee to get Emma's car back was nearly $400. Fuming, Jack called Robert to let him know what had happened. "That's extortion," Robert growled over the phone. "She's escalating because she feels threatened. I'll make some calls, but in the meantime, get the car back and keep the paperwork. We're building a case." That evening, when Jack and Robert returned from retrieving Emma's car, they found their entire front yard covered in pink violation notices, taped to the mailbox, front door, garage, and even the windows. Each one listed a separate violation: improper landscaping, noise disturbances, unauthorized visitor stays, and a dozen others that made no sense. As they were gathering up the papers, Henry Carter swaggered over, leaning against the fence with a smug grin. "Problems, Miller?" he sneered. Jack balled his fists, but Robert stepped in front of him, maintaining his composure. "Trespassing on private property, Mr. Carter. Care to explain yourself?" Henry laughed. "Just doing my duty. As vice president of the HOA, it's my responsibility to ensure compliance." Robert stared him down, voice low and firm. "Your responsibility doesn't include fabricating violations to harass residents. I'd be careful if I were you. Retaliation against a legal complaint is a felony." Henry's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it with indifference. "You don't scare me, old man. You're the one out of your element here." As he sauntered off, Robert's phone buzzed with another message, a photo from one of his contacts at the county office. It was a document, a financial statement from the HOA accounts showing a transfer of $50,000 to a landscaping company owned by Henry's cousin. Robert's eyes glinted. They finally had a smoking gun. The next day, things escalated even further. Jack was preparing to go to work when he noticed a gathering on the street. Curious, he approached and saw Karen, Henry, and Susan at the entrance of the neighborhood, where they were erecting a large metal gate. A gaudy sign read, "Private Community, Residents Only. Entry by HOA Permit Only." "What the hell is this?" Jack demanded. Karen turned with that icy smile. "We're enhancing security. The board voted unanimously to install a gated entry system to prevent unauthorized access. This is for the safety of our community." Jack couldn't believe it. "This is a public road. You can't just block it off." Karen crossed her arms. "It's been reclassified as private property under the HOA's jurisdiction. New rules state that only registered vehicles and guests are allowed entry." Robert was already on the phone with the county assessor's office, verifying property lines and public road classifications. When he hung up, his face was dark with determination. "They can't legally close that road," he whispered to Jack. "I'm contacting the sheriff. This has gone far enough." As they walked back to the house, they noticed something even more disturbing. A group of neighbors gathered around a bonfire in Karen's backyard. It looked like they were burning documents, whole stacks of paper tossed into the flames. Jack took out his phone and snapped pictures from a distance. That night, the tension reached a breaking point. As Jack was locking up, his phone buzzed with a message from a blocked number. "You're playing with fire. Stop digging or you'll regret it." He showed the message to Robert, who simply nodded. "She's getting desperate. When bullies like Karen feel cornered, they lash out. We need to be ready." At dawn, Jack was woken by the sound of shattering glass. He rushed to the living room to find his window smashed in and a brick lying on the floor, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Unfolding it, he read the message scrawled in red paint. "Get out while you still can." Robert was on the phone with the police in an instant, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling over him. That evening, the news broke. Henry Carter had been arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud after an anonymous tip led authorities to the doctored financial records. Karen's carefully curated power structure was starting to crumble, and it wasn't long before HOA members began to turn on each other, blaming one another for the mess. But it wasn't over. The real twist came when Karen, cornered and desperate, appeared at Jack's door one rainy night, her eyes wild and furious. "This is all your fault," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You destroyed everything. My community. My life. How dare you come in here and ruin it all?" Jack stared at her in disbelief. "You did this to yourself, Karen. You and your power-hungry ego." She seemed to crumple, sobbing uncontrollably on his porch. "You don't understand. I built this place. I made it perfect." Just as Jack was about to respond, police cruisers pulled up. Robert had called them as soon as he saw Karen approaching. Officers led her away as she continued muttering incoherently about perfection and control. As she was taken into custody, Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of pity. Beneath all that malice and power-mongering was just a woman desperately trying to maintain control of something that had long since slipped through her fingers. But he knew the battle wasn't over. Even with Karen arrested and Henry exposed, there were still layers of corruption left to unravel. Jack looked over at his father, who nodded solemnly. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Robert warned. Jack took a deep breath, looking back at the darkened house where so much had gone wrong. He wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not after coming this far. There was too much at stake to let the corruption win. In the back of his mind, though, he couldn't help but wonder. Had he really seen the worst of it yet? Or was the real storm still on its way? The morning after Karen's arrest, Jack woke up to an eerie calm. The sun filtered through the broken window, illuminating the shards of glass still scattered across the floor. He carefully stepped around the mess and started brewing a pot of coffee, trying to process the chaotic whirlwind of the past few weeks. Just as he sat down at the table, his phone buzzed with a message from his dad. "County judge approved the emergency motion. The HOA's authority is officially suspended pending investigation. More to come. Stay alert." Jack let out a shaky breath of relief, but he knew better than to feel completely at ease. Just as he was finishing his coffee, a loud knock echoed through the house. He opened the door cautiously, only to find Sarah White, his neighbor, and a few other residents standing on his porch. "Hey, Jack," Sarah said softly. "We just wanted to check in. We heard about the brick and, well, we thought maybe you could use some help cleaning up." Jack was taken aback by their kindness. For weeks, the neighbors had avoided him like he was contagious, but now they seemed genuinely concerned. He smiled, grateful. "Thanks, Sarah. I could definitely use some help." As the neighbors swept up broken glass and replaced the shattered window, they shared hushed conversations. It seemed that with Karen out of the picture, people felt more comfortable speaking out. "You know," Sarah said while wiping down the windowsill, "I always thought Karen was a bit too controlling, but I never imagined she was doing all that shady stuff. I just wanted my garden to stay nice. I didn't sign up for a dictatorship." Another neighbor, Mrs. Collins, chimed in. "She had me terrified to plant sunflowers because she said they didn't fit the community aesthetic. I wish I'd stood up sooner." Jack looked around at his neighbors, people who had been too scared to speak up, too afraid of the iron grip Karen had on the community. He realized that the fear that had kept them in line for so long was finally starting to fade. By midday, Robert arrived with good news. Karen and Henry have both been charged with embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of community funds, he announced, earning a round of surprise gas from the gathered neighbors. And it turns out there's a whole network of corruption being uncovered. Contractors, inspectors, even some of the county officials were involved. One of the older residents, Mr. Harris, shook his head in disbelief. I knew something wasn't right when they doubled our HOA dues last year. Claimed it was for road repairs, but nothing ever got fixed. Robert nodded. The county prosecutor's office is launching a full audit of the HOA's finances. They'll be questioning anyone who signed off on the contracts or authorized the payments. It's going to take time, but this place is finally getting cleaned up. Just then, Sarah pointed down the street. Look! A convoy of county vehicles pulled into the neighborhood, including several police cars. Officers began escorting members of the HOA board from their homes, each of them looking pale and shaken. Susan Hill was being led out in handcuffs, muttering something about just following orders. The final nail in the coffin came later that afternoon when news broke that Karen had decided to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. She gave up everything: names, documents, even videos of secret meetings where HOA leaders plotted to extort homeowners and funnel money into their own accounts. With the corrupt board dismantled, a special meeting was called by the county to establish a temporary, resident-led committee. The atmosphere was hopeful, but also cautious. Jack and Robert were asked to attend as advisors, given Robert's legal expertise and Jack's role in exposing the corruption. During the meeting, Jack stood up and addressed the crowd. I didn't move here to start a war. I just wanted a peaceful place to call home, a place where families can visit without being harassed or fined. This whole mess happened because a few people decided that their power was more important than our community. We can't let that happen again. One of the elderly neighbors, Mr. Jensen, raised his hand. Jack, we want you to be on the new board. You've proven that you're willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's tough. Jack hesitated, glancing at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. If that's what the community wants, I'll do it. But this time, we're going to have open meetings, transparent finances, and most importantly, we're going to treat each other with respect. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in months, Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for a better community. The following weeks were a whirlwind of restructuring. The HOA was reformed with a new charter that prioritized residents' rights and limited the board's power to issue fines without thorough documentation and community consent. A new visitor policy was introduced. All families welcome, no pre-registration required. As the dust settled, Jack's family returned to celebrate his victory, and this time there was no Karen to disrupt the gathering. The barbecue was filled with laughter and music, and the neighbors who had once feared being targeted now felt free to enjoy the community they loved. Later that evening, as Jack and Robert sat on the porch, sipping cold beers, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. You know, Dad, he said, I didn't think I'd end up running the HOA. I just wanted to be left alone. Robert smiled. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never wanted the job. You took a stand when no one else would, and you made a difference. As the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, the air felt lighter, like the neighborhood itself was finally breathing after being suffocated for so long. But even as things calmed down, Jack knew that vigilance was necessary. Corruption didn't just vanish. It lingered, waiting for complacency. That night, as he drifted off to sleep, his phone buzzed one last time with a text from an unknown number. Nice job, hero, but be careful. Power has a way of coming back. Jack stared at the message, his mind racing. Who sent it? Was it a leftover threat from the remnants of Karen's influence, or just someone warning him that the battle for fairness never truly ends? But instead of fear, Jack felt a new resolve. The fight for justice wasn't just about one HOA or one corrupt leader. It was about standing up whenever power threatened to overwhelm fairness. In the end, Jack knew he couldn't let his guard down. But he also knew he had allies now. Good people who wouldn't let fear keep them silent again. As the stars dotted the sky and the neighborhood lay quiet, Jack made a vow to protect the community he'd fought so hard to save. After all, sometimes standing up once isn't enough. You have to keep fighting because the people who seek power rarely give up easily.